Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Project Flux. Today we are really lucky to have Antony Slumbers in a long-reaching conversation. Antony is a globally recognised speaker, advisor and writer specialising in AI, proptech and space as a service. He's a serial entrepreneur with successful proptech exits. He consults with leading real estate boards and he also offers an exclusive AI course called Gen AI for real estate people, which we'll talk about in a lot more detail in the podcast. He provides industry insights through his influential blog at antonyslumbers.com, and he's also extremely active on LinkedIn, so do follow him when you get a chance. Great conversation today with Antony, didn't you think, Yoshi?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I mean, the bit about the importance of envisioning the future to stay ahead, I thought was really key. And I think we went into some good detailed conversations about what that might look like and, the kind of revolution of ChatGPT and what that might look like within a few years and how that impacts construction sites. There's a lot to unpack there, and we could have gone on for ages.
Well, we're definitely going to have him back, that's for sure. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Antony Slumbers. Enjoy. So Antony, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. As I said, I've been listening to your show for quite a long time. It's most enjoyable.
That's great to hear. And I particularly liked when you said that you listened to it on the way to the beach, because I want people to get those kind of positive...
I did. Well, it was that or summer holiday, so...
Yeah, fantastic. And I have to say, we've been keen followers of you on LinkedIn. You're obviously very active on LinkedIn. Must spend a lot of time putting these thought leadership pieces out and articles. And for anyone listening, I thoroughly encourage you to follow Antony. You think you've got about 12,000 followers or so. So well worth following Antony. He always comes up with some real gems that leaves me sitting there questioning things quite often, which is excellent. But just as a kind of introduction for the listeners then, Antony, you've been at the forefront of integrating AI within the real estate sector, which is, as we were talking about before the show started, slightly parallel to the construction sector, but you've been involved with it for years. So what inspired you to create your course, the Generative AI for real estate people, and how do you see AI reshaping the industry in the next few years?
Well, it's quite a long story, which I will cut short. But I've been interested in the whole AI side of things for many years. Back in 2017, I gave a talk at what was then Future PropTech, the conference about AI in real estate. And I remember putting up a slide with 17 workflows within commercial real estate. And saying all of these are in the crosshairs of AI, and of course, to cut a long story short, not a lot happened between 2017 and the end of 22, because that was the world of all predictive analytical AI and real estate being real estate. Truth be told, mostly they don't have the data to actually do machine learning.
Which is similar to the construction.
Yeah. And then in, November the 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT got launched, was so completely up my street in the sense of, just creative and generative, and you just talk to it and ask questions. And, I've always been an absolute news bunny. And I'm sort of horribly curious about everything. And suddenly it was like having this incredible thing that I could just ask all this stuff of. So I got sort of really very, very interested in it then. And then when that came up, I thought, well, actually, this is a different kettle of fish, because yes, there's a lot of generative AI where having lots of data would be a good thing. But essentially, there's huge amounts you can do within any business with generative AI that doesn't involve anyone else's data. All the data is in the training data. They've already done all the data. So in terms of thinking, well, how might this impact, and what's the difficulty of picking this up as opposed to predictive AI? It's like absolute chalk and cheese. So I thought, well, this is definitely going to become a much bigger thing and is likely to be much more pervasive. Because as soon as you say, effectively, anything you do with language can be improved by using a language model. And then you think, well, that's pretty well everything, isn't it? What do we do? What do we do all day? You break people's jobs down into task, most of it is to do with language. And if it's not to do with language, it's to do with software. Oh, and that's okay as well. Or if it's not to do with language, it's to do with images. Oh, well, funny enough, we do lots of that, and voice, and we do lots of that. And you suddenly think this is a technology that is so clearly going to become pervasive into everything in one way. And I started so long ago. I started in January 1995. I went into what was then the first internet cafe in London on my birthday, January the 7th, 1995.
Well, the old Easy Everythings, whatever they were called.
It was actually even before the easy ones. And it was on Poland Street, I think. And I remember thinking, wow, this is cool. Because I was actually doing some residential development then. And I just thought, well, you got lots of people with lots of documents, lots of images, and everyone's all over the place. And you think, well, that's perfect for this. So I started and actually launched my website in March 95, which I think was the first commercial real estate website in the UK. But at that time was so exciting. It was insanely exciting because you were getting new things every week. Literally every week, something new would be coming out.
And do you see some parallels with what's happening now?
Exactly. There has not been a time as exciting as that until now. I mean, yes, you had all the dot-com boom and stuff, but that wasn't about the products getting more. That was a big sort of business bubble. But the actual product development at hyperspeed is what we've been having since end of 22. And I read a tweet by Aaron Levy, who's the boss of Box, and he said, if you think about it, in 18 months, we've gone from a 4,000 token context window to 1 million token context window.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And he said, has there ever been a time in technology when something has improved 250 times in 18 months?
So Anthony, just on that then, because things have developed so quickly, when you first started using ChatGPT, has the way that you've used it changed within the last year or so? Then would you say there are things that you can achieve which you didn't think you could achieve before, but just by purely using ChatGPT, have you found new ways to kind of leverage the AI?
Yes, absolutely. I find there's almost no limit to how hard you can push it. And that's what I keep saying to people. You started off, you ask a few questions, and then you suddenly think, well, I can actually ask a harder question than that. And I'll ask a follow-up as well. And now argue against that. And how would I defend myself against X? Or how would I prosecute Y? And I'm finding that I'm very inclined now to just immediately think, nah, it can't do that. But let's just see what happens anyway. So as an example, last week, it was something popped up in my feed, and it was a master plan. It was just a one aerial master plan of a smallish residential development in Greenwich, I think it was. And I thought, well, I haven't tried GPT's image capabilities recently.
Is this the reading images or
just reading images? Yeah. No, I'm not a fan of DALL-E, but just reading images. And given an image like this, what prompt would you write to enable you to give the most comprehensive description of this master plan to a real estate developer? Because I'm getting quite into, when I can't work out what to prompt it, I think, well, you do it.
Well, you can do that for the image as well, to get good image prompts.
I have to say, if you put something like a master plan in and you say, build me a prompt to do a comprehensive analysis of this, masterful. It came back with like 4 pages of all the different classifications of what should I be looking out for, spatial this, determinations of that. Where's the green? Where's this, that, and the other? So just in asking that one question, I actually learned a lot about what would an urban plan. How does an urban planner think about looking at a master plan? So examples like that. Now, when he actually did the answer, a lot of the answer was pretty good, and there was obviously some not obviously, but there were a few very dodgy things, like very confidently said and it abuts X Street. And I thought, I didn't see an X Street, and X Street doesn't exist. And you say to it, are you sure about this X Street? Well, actually, on reflection, X Street doesn't exist, but something like it might.
Yeah, it's very good at apologising and saying, "Oh yeah,
it's very good at apologising." So
that's why it's important, though, for people to realise that it's not just what you don't just dismiss it after one question. You've got to have a conversation with it. And I find the people that dismiss it are people who have tried it once. They've asked one question, it's come back with something which isn't quite accurate, and they said this is rubbish.
Yeah, because
you know what I find that I often do though. I often find that sometimes when I ask a question and I get too deep into the rabbit hole, as opposed to trying to refix or fix what I've done, I will then just start anew. I don't know if that has a change in the sort of responses that I get.
Sometimes that's quite an effective. Sometimes you have to do that because you've just gone on a bit too long, and you're a bit worried about, there's too much, and it might be missing something out. But I mean, funny enough, I was doing a class on prompting to a group of real estate people in Norway this afternoon, and I've got a sort of presentation. I go through, I think, 12 or 14 different types of prompt, and everyone is actually always blown away when you take people through slightly. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of these incredibly excessive 14-page prompts,
no,
but just a methodology, and just things like saying, look, ask it a hard question, then ask it to critique itself, and then give you a follow-up. And this thing about the second pass is often better. And I love the thing when it come back and he says, these are the strengths, but I was a bit weak in these areas. So
it critiques itself.
Yeah. So things like that. And I think people just don't. You need to. The funny thing, isn't it? Everyone is obsessed with not having to make any effort whatsoever with software. It's like, oh well, there's Excel, but I can't use it. Well, have you tried? Well, no, I should be able to just use it.
People are inherently lazy. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to make a bit of effort, and
absolutely.
you have to start engaging this thing as very lucky to in a room with the smartest person you can imagine on a particular subject.
Yeah, exactly.
And talk to it like a person, because there is this weird thing, isn't it, that they've been trained on human language, so actually they behave a bit like humans, and so it's a bit strange.
Exactly. It's like talking to anybody. If you ask stupid questions, you get stupid answers. So it's about and the other thing is the payoff. It's worth putting some time in working out how to get the best out of it, because the payoff is absolutely massive. If you can get that right, the quality of answers that you can get back, and the time saving that you can make is huge, and it's getting bigger all the time. Sorry, Yoshi.
So do you think that people actually want AI to be more of an automation tool than an augmentation tool, because they simply might be too lazy to actually leverage it as an augmentation tool?
It's difficult for most people to get their head round what it actually is. We're so used to software being deterministic. 2 + 2 = 4, not probabilistic. And this idea that you're not I think it's very hard for people to realize they're not talking to anything that's connected to a database. They think, oh, I'm looking up a question. What's the capital of some obscure country? And he gets it wrong, and people go, well, you see, it's stupid. But it's not. It's not looking up to a database. So I think people find it hard, and certainly this is happening at the corporate level, isn't it? That people are having real problems developing software when software doesn't behave like software.
Yeah.
So people are trying to develop systems where 2 + 2 = 4, +1 = 5. It's going, meh.
Yeah.
I think they're sort of using it for the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of confusion about what AI is. And, I say you separate it into sort of 3 different areas. You've got AI, which is just built into your software. It's not even, a lot of the time, it's not even AI. It's just got some aggressive kind of analytics within it. And then you've got AI, which is built into the stuff that we use every day, your Googles and your Google Maps. And then you've got these large language models, which I think are a category of their own.
Yes.
And that is the bit where people are getting confused, I think, about what that means.
Yeah. When I talk about an AI at the moment, I'm generally only talking about generative AI.
Yeah.
And I think You see, the way I see it and the way I think it's going to really make a difference is it's going to be used by people who don't use it to fulfill necessarily a functional need. It's much more strategic, helping me understand how do I grow my business? How do I frame this proposal in a manner that's most likely to appeal to this type of character? And how do I do it if I want to appeal to this type of character? How do I automate this? And how do I use it to augment me with this and not replace? I mean, there's quite a lot of it clearly is just going to automate loads of things. Anything structured, repeatable, predictable, you'll get rid of that. But we don't want to do that anyway. That stuff's going anyway. So the big question is how you unbundle your job or your team or your company, so you can split things up into this we will fully automate, this we will be augmented by the machine, and this is human only. And then rebundle and remake your businesses. And this is why the feeling the impact is going to be much more dramatic across industries and businesses than other technologies, because there's going to be new companies started by groups of people like you two who completely understand how you can 10x yourself on X, Y. Everyone else is used to maybe getting 10% better, but there's lots of stuff that a group of people starting from scratch, no legacy, unbundling their jobs and their roles and rebundling them into something where we can 10x that, 3x that. Yeah. And so there's going to be companies that are dramatically more competitive. And
because they're coming in from a different angle entirely.
Yeah. Well, they're redesigning it. It goes back to the same old thing they always talk about with when steam factories gave over to electric factories. 1880 or something, first electric motors. But they made no difference in a factory for 40 odd years, because factories had one big drive shaft and pulleys and belts with a steam engine on the end. So just changing the steam engine didn't change anything else about the business. It wasn't until pretty much the 20s when people started to redesign factories and said, instead of having one engine, we'll actually have 20 different engines, and we'll reconfigure how a factory works. So factories went from being just one drive shaft to, if you like, they got unbundled. So this time,
I think that's going to happen a lot faster. That we won't have the luxury of that kind of settling in period of 40 years. I think we're going to have to wake up to it quickly. But I do want to move on. It's a really good segue, actually, what we're talking about, into the second question, which is about jobs. Because on your LinkedIn profile, I think you say AI won't take your jobs, but rather those who use AI will have their competitive edge. Just kind of going on from what you were talking about, could you elaborate on that concept a little bit more and explain perhaps what that means for professionals in either the real estate or construction sector?
Well, yes, I sort of stole that phrase, the one of AI won't take your job by someone using AI won't take your job. I actually don't believe that, because I think for a lot of people, AI actually will take your job. It's not just going to be. There's going to be certainly certain types of jobs that are going to be able to be completely automated. There's definitely.
Well, it's already happening, isn't it?
It's already happening. Look at Klarna in the paper again today.
Yeah,
they've already reduced their head count by something like 30%, and their target is to drop it by 50%.
Yeah,
and this is happening all over the place, particularly in the big companies, or even look at the software companies. Software companies have been sort of actually massively overstaffed, and it turns out that AI is actually helping us find that 100x developer, and so I'll just employ him.
Yeah,
I genuinely. You always have to be careful with this thing, isn't it? Because technologies always take longer than you think to permeate through, because there's always confounding variables, and there's always blockers. There's systemic blockers,
and the human side, the cultural side,
and on the human side, I do think exactly as you say. We're not going to have 40 years to redesign our factories. People are going to be redesigning all range of jobs and businesses within the next couple of years. Now, the question then becomes, we're building a bigger pie. This doesn't necessarily matter. You know, the whole idea of it's the Jevons paradox, isn't it? As electricity got cheaper, it didn't save anyone money because we just used a lot more electricity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sort of hoping that as people can become more productive and individuals and small teams are going to have capabilities that are extraordinary, I think we have the potential to build a much, much bigger pie. We're going to have to an extent, regulate for that, and society has to almost determine that they want to use these technologies to do that. Because there's going to be an enormous potential in a lot of high employment industries for the CEO to do a Musk light and just sack 40% of the people. Because all of them that have been sacking people like crazy, your share price goes up. So if you want to make more money in the short term,
that's a very short-term thing to do.
It's a very short-term thing to do. But there's an awful lot of people who are remunerated based on very short term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of momentum on that. But I think we have to try and imbue everybody with a mentality of we're building a bigger pie here. And I sometimes use the thought of, it's the old joke about in Queen Elizabeth I's time, the only woman in the world who could wear silk stockings was Queen Elizabeth I. Now everyone can wear them. And if you think of something like law, if you're very, very wealthy, you're protected by the very, very best lawyers. But what if everybody had access to the very, very best lawyers? Or what if everyone had access to the very best designers, the very best engineers, the very best of everything? Why not?
We'd just get more done. We'd get more done. It's not like the demand's not there. Often things aren't getting done because it's unaffordable or we haven't got the resources to do it.
Well, exactly. Most of the thing is about. Someone gave me an example. They said, "Well, we run this podcast, and what we do now is after the podcast, we use I can't remember what the software is. So it chops it up into 10 little social media nice chunks and whatever, and chops the video up very nicely. Now we said we do that now. Now, in some ways, you think, oh well, that's now put a video editor out of work. But he says that's not the point because we never had a video editor before because it was never economically viable to do what this enables us to do. So that's a great example of we can do things. These tools should enable us to do things we couldn't do before. And what is my absolute hobby horse when I'm doing talks or if I'm dealing with clients, I always try and say, forget about just digitizing the past. You, particularly now, you've got to be rethinking what does this enable? Or if you think of it in our industry, we've got to think about 3, 5, 7, 10 years ahead because we're building things. I bet a load of your projects, when you start to finish, are at least 5 years.
Yeah, sometimes more. Some of the big projects.
More. Yeah. So you might be, a really big development scheme in central London might be a decade in the works. That's 100 times more compute power than today. So what are people going to be doing then? So we got to be thinking what is not what's possible today, but given the trajectory and where we think these are going, what might that enable in 2 years' time? And how do we get our ducks in the row so that when that capability is there, we can take advantage?
And that's the challenge, isn't it? It's getting people to understand, because I find it's, especially in our sector, and I'm sure it's similar in real estate, getting people to even look 1 year ahead is a challenge. So then get people to actually start looking 5, 6, 7 years ahead is almost impossible at the moment. So it's changing that culture. I don't know if you want to come in there, Yoshi. I think you had a question around that.
Yeah, because it's talking about real estate as well, Antony. So real estate developments often have long timelines, and you just emphasized the importance of envisioning futures to stay ahead. So how can industry leaders balance current demands with the need to anticipate the plan for the needs of decades from a decade from now.
I think you've got to work on the basis that you're to work out how you can morph there. You know, this is not, or hopefully is not a.
It's not a switch you can switch on, is it?
It's not, hopefully, it's not slowly then suddenly. This is a slow process. So I think companies need to become. They need to become extremely problem solving. They need to develop their critical thinking. They need to develop their analytical thinking. That needs to be across the board, and you're just sort of upskilling everybody process. So they're all moving in that way. But again, I think what you'll find is, and this is going to be the great advantage of new companies, they start off, well, 40 of us will get together, and we're already there.
Yeah. And it's that problem decomposition, like you say, starting at it from a blank piece of paper. Because I always use the analogy, if you kind of woke up from and the world had collective amnesia, and you say, right, we need to work out how did you build these things, and you did it from scratch, you wouldn't put together the same processes as a lot of them have been around for decades, sometimes in construction, sometimes 100 years, and you wouldn't put it back together the same way. So I think you're absolutely right when you say we can't just look at digitizing what we've been doing for the last number of decades. We've got to look at how would we do it from scratch. But that's a cultural issue.
But it's a cultural issue, but it's also, I mean, I find construction the strangest industry. Because half of it is very space age. You know, I listen to some of the things you're talking about, some of the products you're talking about, and I go, bloody hell, that's pretty out there and seriously cool. Yeah. And then a lot of the industry is still doing the same things as it did in 1800.
And that's because of the fragmentation in the industry. You've got the big players who, and you know, these kind of signature architects who might be using incredible generative AI platforms, but then at the other end of the scale, you've got the carpenter or something who's a one-man band who's still trying to get to come to terms with fax machines. That's that. So you've got this huge disparity.
Let me ask you two something then. So if you take, I don't know, let's take just residential construction. So there's the fantasy about building 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years, but nevertheless, even if we could. We actually couldn't because we don't have enough people to do it. And you look at the demographics of the construction industry, and they're shocking, aren't they? They're really, really bad. They're as bad as Germany.
And productivity is getting lower and lower year, but we're worse off in productivity than 20 years ago.
Exactly. So if you just look at the demographics, the industry is, you know, I mean, who's the chap who did Modernize or Die years ago?
It's... Yes,
it'll come into your head. You know,
it'll come to me. I'll have to insert it afterwards.
Yeah, and you know, that's not going to change. You know, unless if you just take the UK suddenly allowed massive immigration of construction workers, but that's not going to happen now because originally they came from Poland, and it's better to say Poland.
Exactly. Mark Farmer, by the way. So Mark Farmer.
That's it, Mark Farmer. So if you take that's an inevitability. That you're going to have increasingly small numbers of highly skilled construction workers. You're actually going to have, I think in some ways, maybe at the domestic level, you're going to have more and more construction workers, because I had to hire a plumber the other day, and you start realizing what plumbers can charge, and you think that's actually a seriously well-paid job if you do that as a domestic level.
It's supply and demand, isn't it? Because there's just not enough out there.
Yeah, but if you take that, so that's a sort of inevitability. And then look at the progress with robotics and humanoid robotics. Yeah. So we know where robotics are now. Think of that 3, 5, 10 years ahead. Then think about, okay, pretty well all the modular systems haven't worked to date for various sort of business model situations. But there's clearly going to be a requirement that if we want to build at massive scale, 10 years out, 5 years out, we are going to have to be combining humanoid robots with some form of modular construction type thing.
Agreed.
And that's going to be a completely new business model. So you have people like, I can't remember what their name. They were a big American company that tried to do it end to end. raised a load of money, did really well, and then they crashed and burned. But
There's a few
so
of them
anyway, a
quite,
number of people have tried it at the moment. It hasn't really worked. But that's the sort of thing that I can imagine people like you thinking about. Right, 5 years time, where are these things going to be? What's the business model to then utilize? What does this enable?
Yeah, and I think we talked about it, I think, on the last podcast. I think the construction site in 5 years' time is going to look very different because of these humanoid robots and because of the fact that's going to push us down a more modular path. Because by its very nature... Sorry, Yoshi.
And on that, James, one thing I've noticed as well is recently Unitree G1 robot has been released, and they are selling that at only 16,000 USD. So the price is becoming a lot cheaper. Now, the maturity of that sort of robot might not be as good as, things like Figure 2 or Boston Company and a few others. But the prices are coming down, and the level of capabilities is quite impressive. So, like I mentioned, we saw it out in Spartanburg, California, and there's also now an AI-powered solar installation robot being deployed for Amazon's data centers, and it can install solar panels twice as fast. And these things can work tirelessly. So we're seeing it on sites in many different forms. We're seeing it on many different types of projects. So it's an inevitable for me.
I think so, but it is to be wrapped around a business model of some description.
And that's where you get the new players entering the market, don't you? That going back to what you said at the very beginning of this podcast, it's going to take a whole change of methodology. But just playing devil's advocate for a minute, because I think we're all proponents of what's going on. But for the listeners who are kind of saying, yeah, I've heard this all before, and your course really, I think, focuses on the transformative power of AI. But some might argue that the industry will have this heavy reliance on AI that then could lead to an over-automation, over-reliance that then undermines that human touch and then the creativity in real estate or construction. So how would you respond to those concerns, Antony?
I think the reality is, and I'm finding this as I use these tools, that I used to think I would end up using these tools very much in sort of centaur mode. So I would do this, and I get the machines to do that. Whereas I'm finding now that I use these tools much more in cyborg mode. So I literally use them as if they're sitting on my shoulder. So I'll write something jointly with them, or I'll be doing something. I'll ask it a question. So I describe it as the difference between a Battenberg cake and Eton mess. So if you think of a Battenberg cake, which is just squares and everything's in its silo, is to eat a mess where everything's rolled up. And I'm sure you've noticed this.
I can see that being the title of this podcast.
Eton mess. From Battenberg cake to Eton mess. But you must have found this as well, that when you're using these things, I find you actually need to know quite a bit about what you're using them for to get the most out of them, because you do need to know. No, you're going off the wrong direction there. You need to push it back. And my instinct, certainly for now, God knows what the situation would be when they're 100 times more powerful. But for now, human plus machine is definitely the top thing. And I have a feeling, again, this is something that we as society need to decide in terms of how we want societies to develop. Do we retain? We need to develop our societies where actually we retain, for most things, or certainly the things of import, human agency is decided. So, Picasso used to have this phrase where he said, computers are useless. They can only give you answers. Well, actually, computers can give you quite good questions now. But the basic principle of it's for us to decide what we want to use these things for, and everything we do should be about deciding what we want them to do. How do we want them to operate? Where do we want them to operate? Where is the human in the loop?
Yeah.
And the human in the loop thing is really, really important, because there's lots of places you don't want a human in the loop. That's not where the real value is. But this is something you get to with sort of unbundling and rebundling your jobs. You think, well, where where does the human really add value to whatever it is my role to do? And we've got to develop that. But you have to. Everybody has to lean in, retain agency, and not let these things decide what we're going to be like. So
that's much bigger than construction and real estate, isn't it? That's a societal issue.
That's a societal thing. And across the board, I certainly argue whenever I'm doing presentations to people, and people say, well, what should we do to start with? I say the first thing you should do is forget about your company, forget about your team, think about you. Think about what it is you do and go through this process of unbundling and bundling and work out where you can be enhanced by these things.
Yeah. And
then that'll start to permeate out. But it's definitely a mindset, because potentially, whether it takes 10 years or 20 years, I mean, you two are still going to be busy at work in 20 years' time. So whether it happens in 10 years or 20 years doesn't really matter.
It's irrelevant, isn't it? It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. You've got to prepare yourself for it. So,
Antony, how do you think our ability to regulate AI will change once we hit AGI?
I'm in the camp of don't stress yourself about AGI, because it ain't happening anytime soon. AGI will only happen if we change the definition so much that we want it to happen. AGI,
there's so many definitions of AGI, aren't there now?
AGI in the sense of a machine can do absolutely everything I can do. Absolutely everything. Not bits of it, but everything. That's AGI.
So when you say, a while away, are you talking 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, this is the really strange thing at the moment, isn't it? That you listen to even people like Demis Hassabis, the boss of DeepMind, who's a brilliant man. I've been following him for forever. He's just the most interesting and very, very sane. He's not a tech bro libertarian evangelist. He's very, very sane.
Chess player.
Yeah, he's a brilliant chess player. But he's saying to the end of the decade or so.
Yeah, that's what the boss on Nvidia says as well.
A few of them, yeah.
If you think about it, one of the slides on my presentation, I start up with 10,000x in 8 years. And I say, well, what's that? That's the increase in compute power of an Nvidia GPU in 8 years, 10,000 times.
It's incredible.
And you know the story about the chessboard and the rice. You start with 1 grain of rice on the first square, and then you double it. It is 1, 2, 4, 8. It's sort of nothing. But by the time it gets to the second half of the chessboard, we're like we are now. So if you go back 8 years, and we're now 10,000 times as much compute power as 8 years ago. If we're 10,000 times as much compute power in 8 years from now as we are now,
then we probably are at AGI.
And then, well, yeah, exactly. Who the hell knows? But you listen to someone like Jan LeCun, who's boss of AI at Meta, who is adamant that humans are still the apex species, and he's adamant that regardless of compute power, it's still going to be down to us to design what they should do.
And I kind of hope that is the truth in some ways, because I think once you get past that, we lose control, and it's going to be very hard to wrestle it back.
All of this has got. What's the purpose of this? The purpose of this should be to improve everybody's lives. Yeah. Otherwise, what on earth is the point of any of this? And it's like people saying, there's not going to be any jobs to do. And I put up the UN software development goals. Well, when we've solved those, then let's worry about not having any jobs to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and then, that'd be quite a nice problem to have.
There was a really interesting talk by Clifford. Do you know Matt Clifford?
Yeah. He's the guy who's been appointed by the government, hasn't he?
Brilliant.
Yes.
Brilliant chap. Yeah. He used to write absolutely the best newsletter, and then he stopped because he was doing too much stuff for the ARIA and stuff. But he was on a podcast with on the 20 VC podcast the other week, and was talking about where are we going now, and he was talking about we're now going to a time where actually intelligence is going to make a lot more difference. So he said what's happened the last 10 years is basically all these improvements have largely come through scale. You know, bigger, more data, bigger compute, bigger training runs. Nothing really has changed algorithmically. I mean, stuff has, but not fundamentally. But he's adamant that we're now getting to the stage that, you know, we're not going to be able to just 10x the amount of data and the compute over the next 8 years. It's very, very unlikely, but it's individual intelligences of people thinking up new algorithms and new ways to work. But he is always really good in wrapping it in society needs to determine where it wants to get to.
And I think that's true. That's right. Otherwise, it's the tail wagging the dog. You know, we're doing this to try and improve things because there's a lot to improve out there. So I'm still very, very hopeful. Before we wrap up, Antony, I won't want to go without you explain to everyone what your Generative AI for Real Estate People course is all about and when the next cohort is. So do you just want to let people know how they can enroll and what it's all about and what people it's for?
Okay, thank you. I started this course last September, and it's called the #Generative AI for Real Estate People course. And it's designed for practitioners. It's not a technical course. You're not going to come on this and learn how to program a neural network. It's for practitioners and people who are working through this, thinking about how is my job going to change and how is it going to change my industry. So I do a lot on what is going to change, how it's going to change the operations of real estate. So we look at, well, what's this going to mean for location? What's this going to mean for autonomous buildings? What's this going to mean for the office? What's this going to mean for the home? What's this going to mean for whatever in terms of the operation? And then we look quite a lot at, in that case, how is this going to impact demand? And how is the nature of demand going to change? Because now we've got to pay a lot more attention to the occupiers of our space, because they realize that they don't need to come. If you just take the office market, everyone realized over COVID they actually don't need to be in the office to do the work. They need to be made to want that, and it's completely changed the dynamic. So it's a look at the overall nature of supply and demand, how this is going to impact supply and demand with the industry. And then it's a training course in how to work with ChatGPT, Claude, and Midjourney to the level that you are then capable of leveraging these tools to do whatever you want with. And it runs for 3 weeks. We have 3 2-hour Zoom sessions on Fridays. The next one starts 6th of September. If you go to antonySlumbers.com/course, there's all the details about it. But I've just thinking, as I was talking about that, we're talking about how is it going to change the industry? Can people carry on doing what they did before? If you think in terms of how this might change the nature of demand, in the same way as technology changed the nature of demand for offices, when we realized, well, technology enables us to disaggregate ourselves from a physical office. What is AI going to do? So if you are not paying attention to 3-5 years ahead, you have an awful big chance of either building assets that are going to be obsolete or owning assets that are going to be obsolete. And that's why I think this isn't going to be like it might have been 20 years ago, that if you didn't do anything, it doesn't matter, just throw up a BCO grade office building and someone will take it. Now everything we're building has to find a customer, and our customer's changing. So I don't think we've got the luxury anymore of just going, never mind, we won't do anything.
It's going to give people that competitive advantage, and I think it goes back to that adoption thing. Everything's speeding up now, isn't it? But Antony, we could talk to you all evening, I'm sure, and it'd be great if perhaps you'd be kind enough to come back on the podcast, maybe in a few months, to tell us some of the stuff that you're up to. We're sort of kindred spirits, and we're talking about a lot of the same things in slightly different fields, sort of parallel universes, like you say, with real estate construction. But that's been a extremely enlightening conversation. We will put the link that you've just mentioned for if anyone does want to sign up to your course in the show notes, and you can reach out to Antony direct. But Antony, any sort of final words before we sign off for the evening?
I just wanted to ask you two again what you see in your most positive hypothesis of where construction is going to be 3-5 years time.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent is all these technologies going to be pervasive through the way you all work? So how constrained are you going to be by, if you like, historical legacy 5 years time in your most positive? Because so much of what you're doing today is already actually very advanced.
Yeah, I think it's, I talked about these kind of different sort of scenarios, best case, worst case, and most likely case. I won't talk about I won't end the podcast on a depressing note, but in the positive side of things, I think that especially on the big projects where you've got the supply chain and design team of people using generative AI, what we can effectively do is cut out a lot of them, the waste and them having to go over things over and over again, so that we can just get to the final answer on whatever it may be, whether that's the design, whether that's the cost plan, whether that's the schedule, faster, so you can then start getting to the value add quicker. And ultimately, that you end up with a product that delights the client more. Because there's that awful statistic from Bent Flubier that I'm sure you know, which is only 1 in 200 projects finish on time, on budget, and to the benefits outlined in the business case. So my most positive, we're not going to get to 100%. So my most positive, if we can 10 times that would be good going.
Yeah, that's a very good book, isn't it? One last thing as a hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the quality of a lot of modern buildings
mm-hmm.
and how value engineered so many of them clearly are,
mm-hmm.
if we are able to automate the construction of assets
mm-hmm.
much more than now,
mm-hmm.
what's the potential for a renaissance in artisans and embellishment and artistry in buildings? You think of the Victorians and what they built for a pumping station,
or the Romans, as we were talking about before this podcast started,
or the Romans, and maybe if you could build the chassis, if you like, of a building much more, so will we be able to pay more attention to the creative and the human and the artistic?
Well, this is what I'm saying is that, you say value engineering, often what we're actually doing is cost cutting, because
right phrase.
Make something work financially, everything is so difficult to make it work. So you're having to make some drastic actions. If we can actually use AI to make sure the design's more efficient, to make sure the construction's more efficient, so that the cost comes down, so that you've then got more budget to do some of the artisan things, I think that's a great opportunity. Yeah. And then we can go into the whole discussion, which we had a few months ago now, around, what are architects going to do in this space? Who's going to be the first architects that license out their generative AI design to smaller architects so they can use them, like the same way that some of the bands are sort of licensing their own artistic packaging.
I'm still fundamentally incredibly positive that great artists are going to exist in
that might be the only thing that's left. It might be that is what makes us human, and why you need the human in the loop, because I think that's going to be the bit that's going to be really, really hard for a machine to overtake, is that creative endeavor. And when I talk, I've had a few people, I've had architects on the show, and we've had graphic designers. They've all said that they've been so surprised how Gen AI, everyone thought it will all be AI will be an automation thing, getting rid of the mundane sort of tasks. Actually, what's happened is it's gone straight in for the creative industries. No one saw that coming.
No. Well, that's a very positive spin on it, and human is the new luxury.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, we will leave it there. But Antony, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I do hope you'll come on again another time.
I certainly will. It's been a lot of fun, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.